In 1974, I went to the USC Film School because I wanted to become a famous movie director. And one of the early courses that I took was a class in screenwriting, in writing a treatment, which is the first step toward writing a screenplay. The classes were designed so that you would write the treatment in one semester and then you would write the full screenplay in the next semester, almost as you would do if you were a real screenwriter. And the skills that I learned writing treatments, I would soon translate into writing synopses for novels. But I looked around and I said to myself, they're always telling you to write what you know. I don't want to write what I know. I want to write what I want to find out, or where I want to go, or who I want to meet when I get there. And I thought to myself, I also know that we always write what we know, because we're always writing about human nature. We're always writing about the people around us. And I looked around at the other friends who had arrived in California there in the spring of 1974. One of them ended up as a famous network executive. Another one won an Academy Award as a cinematographer, and another one has had a hand in many television series and movies, including 9 to 5. And we were all young and very much uncertain of what was going to happen, but we all had stardust in our eyes. And I thought to myself, we're all just like the people who came here 130 years ago, who came to the gold rush, who built California. I know, I'm going to write a treatment about the gold rush. And so I did. It was about a 40-page treatment, which was the story that you will read in this novel, or have read in this novel, about a band of New Englanders who gathered together in January of 1849. They all put up $100 or $150 to buy tools, food, and provisions, and sail around the Horn to California with complications ensued. He introduced a young man named James Spencer, who was going to write a journal about this whole event. James Spencer, of course, is a young man who's from wealth, doesn't really need the money, but sees the gold rush as the opportunity to see the elephant. That was the term young men at the time used. We're going to see the elephant, that big exhibit, that last grand, strange adventure, before we settle down to a life of domesticity and boredom. And then there were others, like Michael Flynn, the Irishman who's on the ship, whose goal was to get rich, for whatever reason. More on those guys later. I wrote the treatment. I actually found in a notebook that I had used when I was writing the treatment, I actually found the notes from my professor, a guy named Erwin Blacker, who was actually rather famous in that he had been the story editor on the TV series Bonanza. You all remember Bonanza. Someone said, I haven't heard your voice. I was wondering what your voice would sound like. So I said I would sing. That's the limit of my singing. If we were talking about the Lincoln letter, I might sing Lincoln and Liberty too, but you wouldn't want to hear that. So this was the first paragraph of his response to my work. The story of a proper Bostonian and a fiery Irishman in trying to make a quick fortune in the gold rush is certainly prime movie material. You tell the story fairly well, packing it with more than enough action. That was the earliest response to anything I ever wrote, was that paragraph. The next semester, I took that material and I took the rest of these notes, I used them, and I wrote a full-length screenplay called The Motherlode about this set of characters. And The Motherlode won the 1976 Hal Wallace Screenwriting Fellowship. Hal Wallace, of course, was the famous movie producer who had produced Casablanca, Yankee Doodle Dandy, True Grit, Beckett, all the Elvis movies, and in 1976 he was coming to the end of his career, but he was inspiring young screenwriters. So thanks to Hal Wallace, I got $2,500, which, believe me, in 1976 is a lot of money if you were just a graduate student. $2,500. I got my name on the front page of Variety. I still have that issue of Variety. And I got an agent out of it, because every agent in town wanted the hot new screenwriter who had written this Hal Wallace Screenwriting Fellowship winner, and I got to meet the man himself. There I am, me and Hal Wallace in his office in 1976. I looked a lot younger then. Somebody who was sitting in the back of the room looked at this picture and said, "Wow, you were a real stud then, weren't you?" My response was, "I still am." Hal Wallace didn't want to produce the screenplay. I said to him, "I have another idea for a movie with John Wayne." He said, "Well, we have a very good relationship with John Wayne." And I could not make the script work. It was King Lear as a Western. Why do you laugh? It would have been fantastic. It would have been. What's his name? The great Japanese director? Kurosawa. A Throne of Blood is Macbeth. Anyway, I'm digressing again. But I feel like I'm among friends, so I can digress all I want. And one of the best digressions comes from this comment that my friend said, "You look like a real stud then." I said, "Well, that was before I broke my jaw." Oh. Well, and that's a writer's story. The breaking of the jaw is a writer's story. Because right after I finished The Mother Lode, which would eventually become Bound for Gold, when I put it in the drawer and let it sit for 40 years, right after I did that, I dreamed up a character by the name of Peter Fallon, a treasure hunter, a young man in his late 20s who had gone to Harvard, graduated with, or was about to graduate with a degree in history. And his father had said to him, when he said, "Dad, I want to go to study history," the father had said, "I really wish you'd go to law school." And so Peter was trying to prove to his father that getting a history degree was something that was really worth it, and that he could make a living from that. And I was trying to prove to my father that I could make a living with a film degree, because I had gone to my father and said, "Dad, I want to go to film school." And he had said, "Film school? Oh, I'd really rather see you go to law school. But if you don't do what you want to do when you're young, you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." 30 years later, my son graduated from Harvard and came to me and said, "Dad, I want to go to film school." And I said, "Film school? Oh, I'd really rather see you go to law school. But as your grandfather said to me," etc., etc. He's actually doing well now. He's not writing screenplays, he's writing games. He's writing a big epic World War II D-Day game right now that I suspect will be pretty successful. But I created Peter Fallon. I dreamed up the story of the lost tea set in Back Bay. Some of you may have read that book. And by the way, one of the more satisfying aspects of my career is to know that both Back Bay and Cape Cod this past spring have been re-released, not only with the new covers that you see here, but also in larger trade paperback format. And that really doesn't happen too often anymore to 40-year-old works of popular fiction. So I think Peter Fallon has lasted, and so has Cape Cod. But I started working on Peter Fallon, and I started killing myself, pounding away, writing this novel about Peter Fallon and Horace Taylor Pratt, the Boston shipper who who stole the tea set from the White House before the British burned Washington and smuggled it back to Boston, where the tea set may or may not have sunk into the landfill of the Back Bay. And after about 3 months of killing myself on this book, learning a lot about the process of writing and how you have to conduct yourself between the ears in order to be a writer, my wife came upstairs and said, you know, we really need to get out of the house. And so I said, okay, let's go for a hike. We were living in Los Angeles at the time, and we were hiking. We decided to go hiking up above Pasadena, and we were near a waterfall called Lewis Falls, and I slipped off the top of the waterfall, and I fell 40 feet. And I'm going to spare you all the gory details, except to say that I woke up in intensive care that night and looked at my hands, and both my hands were in casts. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I write longhand on loose leaf. I have to keep writing. I know, I'll dictate. I didn't know that out in the anteroom at that point, the doctors were telling my wife that because of the massive blood loss that I had suffered and the speed with which I had been rushed to anesthesia, that I might have suffered some brain damage. There have been some critics since. But I subscribe to what Oscar Wilde said about the critic. The critic is the one who rides around after the battle is over and shoots the wounded. So my wife came in, and she leaned real close to me. And she said, how are you? And I said, I'm okay. And she leaned a little closer and she said, who is Horace Taylor Pratt? And I was too groggy to ask her what the hell kind of a stupid question that was. I said, he's the main character from Back Bay. And she said, oh, thank God. I said, furthermore, longhand on loose leaf, both hands in casts, bring me a tape recorder, I'm not going to miss a day. I was loaded up on morphine. I'm not going to miss a day. So she brought in the tape recorder, she put it by the bed. I proved that I could manipulate it. A little while later, the oral surgeon came in, and he said, open your mouth. And I opened my mouth, and he took my upper jaw and slid it back and forth like a loose dental plate. And he said, you have a broken jaw. And they wired my mouth shut, and I didn't eat, let alone dictate, for the next 6 weeks. But I learned about writing, and I can tell you the exact scene that I wrote the day I got home from the hospital on that book. And so I finished Back Bay, and it was a lightning strike. 14 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and 40 years later, almost 40 years later, people are still reading it. And that's a pretty satisfying thing to be able to say.